Hey everyone, and welcome back to Incomplete Talks with Mohsen and Mamol. Today, we're diving into a question that's on everybody's minds these days.
Who should be in charge in Pakistan?
Yeah.
The military or civilian leaders?
That's right at the heart of it. We've got this discussion about an article that seems to point to some pretty serious tensions,
Yeah.
like within the U.S. government itself.
Oh.
It kind of raises these questions about, are the CIA and the Trump administration on the same page about how Pakistan should be run?
Okay, so the big questions we're going to look at are, what are these disagreements supposedly about?
Right.
Who should be in charge in Pakistan?
Yeah.
The military or civilian leaders?
Exactly.
What's the history between the U.S. and Pakistan that kind of led to this point?
Yeah.
And then what could this all mean going forward, for Pakistan and the countries around it?
Yeah, for the whole region.
We're going to look at some surprising historical connections and even try to imagine what might happen in the future.
Absolutely. We've got a mountain of videos, articles, expert opinions, and trust me, things are about to get spicy.
Along those lines, you might also find it interesting to think about whether the Trump return is good for Pakistan or not. So check out our video.
Mm-hmm.
And if you find our incomplete talks with Mohsen and Mamol helpful, please subscribe to this channel.
And hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming Incomplete Talks with Mohsen and Mamol. Right, so let's start with this disagreement that we've been talking about.
Okay.
This Incomplete Talks with Mohsen and Mamol kind of suggests that there's this split.
Okay.
The CIA apparently would prefer it if the military was running things in Pakistan, while the Trump administration supposedly wants a civilian government.
Right, and it's fascinating trying to figure out why they would each have these positions.
Yeah, what's behind that?
So the CIA being comfortable with the Pakistani military, that probably comes from their long history together.
Their relationship's going way back.
Yeah, ties that go back decades. While the Trump administration wanting civilian rule, maybe that's because they have a different plan for Pakistan's role in the region.
Strategic thinking there.
Yeah, and then there's this whole thing about Hussein Haqqani supposedly lobbying against Prime Minister Imran Khan without Khan even knowing about it.
Right.
Which really makes the internal politics even more complicated.
Yeah, it adds a whole other layer to it.
And it's important to remember this preference the CIA has for the military in Pakistan. It's not happening in a vacuum.
Right.
It's part of a bigger historical picture, right?
Exactly.
The U.S. relationship with Pakistan has basically been all about the military from the beginning.
It's the early days, yeah.
And if you look at the broader picture, this fits with how the U.S. has dealt with a lot of different parts of the world.
Yeah, during the Cold War and even afterward.
And here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
This whole idea of Pakistan playing a double game, especially after they found Osama bin Laden, the U.S. was giving tons of aid to Pakistan for the war on terror. But then bin Laden turns up living right there in Pakistan.
Yeah.
So naturally, there was a lot of criticism from the U.S., especially from the State Department.
Yeah, they care about diplomacy and, maintaining trust.
Exactly.
So they weren't happy.
And what we're looking at suggests that the CIA liking to work with military regimes isn't just a Pakistan thing.
Right. It's not unique to them.
It's like a pattern.
A pattern.
And the historical role that they give to the CIA is to counter these socialist or anti-U.S. movements in developing countries.
Yeah, keep things in line with U.S. interests.
And they give examples like General Pinochet in Chile and similar situations in Brazil, Argentina, Venezuela, and of course several times in Pakistan.
Like a recurring theme.
So for the CIA, it's often easier to work through intelligence agencies and military leaders.
Makes sense operationally.
If they want to do something secretly or arrest someone, they can just go straight to the people in charge of security.
It's more direct.
It's more efficient than trying to deal with all the complexities of a civilian government.
Right, all the bureaucracy and red tape.
Exactly. And they even talk about the arrest of Sharifullah.
Oh, yeah.
They suggest that the CIA might have made him seem more important than he really was.
Interesting.
Just to get the Trump administration to approve working with the Pakistani military.
Like they were trying to play the system a bit.
Yeah, maybe maneuvering within the U.S. government to keep those relationships going and do things the way they're used to doing them.
Keep those channels open.
And all this goes back to the choices that Pakistan made early on.
Right in the beginning.
Right after they became independent, the first leaders decided to side with the West, specifically with the U.S., against the Soviet Union.
Yeah, they picked a side in the Cold War.
And that really shaped everything that came after.
It set them on a certain course?
Signing Seato and CENTO, those military pacts in the 1950s, really cemented that relationship with the U.S.
Yeah, those were all about containing Soviet influence.
Exactly, and they point out that the military was key in negotiating those agreements.
Working hand in hand with the CIA.
Yeah, from the very beginning.
That's where those strong military-to-military ties we're talking about really started.
And according to this material, that foundation led to the U.S. and especially the CIA supporting all sorts of military leaders in Pakistan.
Yeah. Okay.
You've got Ayub Khan after he suspended the constitution.
Right.
Yahya Khan General Zia-ul-Haq, who they say got a lot of financial help during the Afghan jihad, even though he executed a prime minister.
Wow.
And even General Musharraf after his coup and during the Dirty War.
So a consistent pattern there.
A very consistent pattern. And
Yeah.
they argue that this alignment with the U.S. came at a real cost for Pakistan.
Like what kind of cost?
Well, they had to offer up their strategic location.
Yeah.
They had the case of Ahafia Siddiqui people being sent to Guantanamo Bay, and then all the awful consequences of the war on terror at home.
So much loss of life and damage to the economy.
Exactly. And it's really troubling when you think about how much the Pakistani people suffered while a small group got rich.
Yeah, that contrast is really stark.
And now, shifting to the present and looking ahead,
Good.
this incomplete talks with Mohsen and Mahmoud brings up Afghanistan and how the U.S. might be planning things in the region.
What are they saying?
They talk about the situation with Afghan refugees in Pakistan and how they're trying to deport even those who've been there a long time.
Right.
And if we zoom out and look at the bigger picture,
Okay.
what they're suggesting is that this, along with the Pakistani military going into Afghanistan,
Mm-hmm.
it might all be part of a bigger U.S. strategy.
Okay, and I'm listening.
The U.S. is seeing China's growing power economically and maybe even militarily.
Yeah, China's a rising force.
And they're trying to find ways to manage that or contain it.
Right.
And this is where it gets really interesting and maybe pretty scary.
Okay.
They're talking about the possibility of creating a jihadist camp
A jihadist camp.
involving Afghanistan, Pakistan, and the Central Asian countries to cause trouble in China's Xinjiang region.
They're drawing a parallel to the anti-Soviet jihad in the 1980s.
Yeah, which had such terrible long-term consequences for the whole region.
Yeah, it really destabilized things.
And this leads to the idea of dollar-fueled wars.
Dollar-fueled wars.
They're saying that Pakistan has basically become dependent on conflict to make money ever since the 1950s.
So they need these conflicts to keep going.
In a way, yeah, but it's been really bad for most Pakistanis.
Right. All that poverty and so many kids not going to school.
While a tiny elite gets richer,
It's a vicious cycle.
and they also bring up the growing tension between Iran and the U.S.
Yeah.
and how dangerous that could be for Pakistan, especially along the border with Balochistan.
Right, that could really destabilize things further.
It could pull in China and Afghanistan and mess up CPEC, that big project with China.
That would be a major setback.
And they warn against trying to play both sides this time.
Like they did before.
Yeah, trying to balance between the U.S. and China, they're saying that's probably going to backfire.
You can't please everyone.
And it could make things even worse inside Pakistan.
Right, more instability.
And this brings us to a really important point about Pakistan's own politics.
Okay.
They emphasize how crucial it is to have a real debate in parliament about foreign policy and security.
Yeah, those are huge issues.
But they say that right now, the parliament and the media in Pakistan, they can't really have those conversations
Right on.
because of limits on free speech and anyone who disagrees being called a traitor.
So there's not a lot of room for dissent?
Not really. And tying this back to what the U.S. wants in Pakistan,
Okay.
they repeat the claim that there are people in both Pakistan and the U.S. who want a new conflict in Afghanistan.
Another war?
Yeah, and they think it could spread to Central Asia and even towards China.
That's a really dangerous idea.
It is. They say it's a threat to Pakistan's very existence and to the whole region.
Wow.
And, the U.S. has a history of getting involved in other countries.
Afghanistan, Iraq,
Yeah,
Yemen, Libya, Syria.
and maybe Iran next.
Yeah, that's a real concern.
And those interventions have often led to devastation.
So much destruction.
And the question they ask is, how long can Pakistan keep depending on outside powers?
Right.
Thinking they're getting benefits, but actually paying a huge price.
Paying with their own people's well-being.
And their sovereignty.
Yeah, they're independent.
Now, what about this idea of the CIA wanting military rule and the Trump administration wanting civilian rule?
Okay.
Who's more likely to get their way?
That's the big question.
Well, they say that the CIA, with all their connections to Pakistan's security agencies,
Yeah, they've built up those relationships.
they probably have more influence in Washington when it comes to Pakistan.
So they might have the upper hand.
But they also consider the scenario where the Trump administration or maybe the State Department under someone else,
Okay.
they gain more influence.
And what would happen then?
Well, they think that even in that case, the U.S. goals would probably stay the same.
So the strategy wouldn't really change.
They would still want to use PTI if they got back in power as a kind of front line against China. Right.
And to improve things with India.
So it's more about how they achieve those goals.
Yeah. Just with a different preferred way of working with Pakistan.
Interesting.
But what's important here is how Pakistan would react.
Right.
They suggest that PTI supporters, and maybe even Imran Khan himself, they might reject that kind of deal.
Why?
Because they would see it as compromising Pakistan's sovereignty.
Oh, so just trading one kind of external influence for another.
Exactly. And this leads to what they frame as the core struggle for Pakistan.
Okay, the main issue.
The fundamental need to protect their sovereignty and their independence.
Yeah, to be in control of their own destiny.
Exactly. And they connect the fight for democracy in Pakistan to the fight to free their foreign economic and strategic policies from outside control.
So they're linked together.
They are. And they say that any agreements made with Washington or Rawalpindi, where the Pakistani military is headquartered,
right,
without the Pakistani people really being on board.
Without their consent. Those agreements are unacceptable.
It has to come from the people.
And they say that real freedom means pushing back against what they call militarized politics, judiciary, media economy, and foreign policy.
So it's like this deep-rooted militarization.
Yeah, that affects everything.
And they talk about how people in Pakistan are becoming more aware of this.
More aware.
And more resistant to outside influence?
Yeah, it's different from the 1980s when they say the U.S. had a lot of control over education.
And could more easily create jihadis.
Yeah, and they contrast that with how China approaches foreign policy.
Okay, how is it different?
China focuses on development. They don't interfere. And they don't have military bases all over the world.
Which is very different from the U.S.
And they point to the strong social movements in Pakistan, like PTM, PTI, the Baloch protests, Sindh protests, farmer movements.
So many different groups.
As signs that people are pushing back against these external agendas.
They're not just going along with it anymore.
And their final argument is a call for Pakistan to break free from what they see as a declining U.S.
A declining U.S.
And instead build stronger relationships with their neighbors.
Who would that be?
Iran, Afghanistan, China, India, Russia.
A lot of important players.
To create stability in the region and pursue their own interests.
Their own interests.
Without Washington telling them what to do.
So making their own choices.
Exactly. So to sum up for you, the main thing that Incomplete Talks with Mohsen and Memel highlights is this tension.
Okay.
Between the U.S. historically relying on its relationship with the Pakistani military.
Right, those deep ties.
And this may be strategic preference for civilian rule from some parts of the U.S. government.
Okay.
All happening while there's this big competition between world powers.
Yeah, the U.S. and China vying for influence.
And it really suggests that outside forces have been shaping Pakistan's path and its internal power struggles for a long time.
A really long time.
So here's a question for you to think about.
Okay.
Given all this history and these competing interests from outside, how can Pakistan achieve real lasting sovereignty and truly put the well-being of its people first?
That's the ultimate goal.
It is. And think about the things happening inside Pakistan that could either keep these old patterns going.
The same old story.
Or maybe finally break free from them.
Yeah, create a new path.
And before we wrap up this Incomplete Talks with Mohsen and Memel, please subscribe to this channel for more in-depth discussions.
We'll see you next time.